60 days after the battle, humanity and the Galactic Concordat met in neutral space to sign what would become known as the Treaty of Taroth. Negotiating chamber was a hastily constructed space station, exactly halfway between Earth and the Concordat fleet's current position. Neither side trusted the other enough to meet on their home territory, but both had finally accepted that continued fighting would destroy them. Both Ambassador Ziegther entered the chamber with a delegation of 12 Concordat representatives, all of them wearing what the translation computers indicated were formal diplomatic regalia. Across the table sat Secretary General Maria Okonkwo, General Marcus Webb, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, and Admiral Chen Wei. Representing humanity, the contrast was striking. The Concordat delegates looked pristine and formal, while the human representatives showed the clear signs of having spent the past 2 months in a war zone. Maria's diplomatic suit had been patched in 3 places. Webb's dress uniform bore scorch marks from the battle, and Yuki had a healing scar across her forehead from when her research station had been hit by debris. But none of them looked defeated. "Shall we begin?" Maria asked formally. "Yes," Ziegther agreed, settling into his seat with a fluidity that still looked alien despite weeks of video calls. The Concordat Council has reviewed the events of the past 2 months and has reached several conclusions. He activated a holographic display showing the agreed-upon treaty terms first. The Concordat recognizes human sovereignty over all current territorial holdings, Ziegther said. Reading from what was clearly a prepared statement, "We withdraw all demands for colonial dismantlement and military oversight." Webb raised an eyebrow, but said nothing second. "We propose a mutual non-aggression pact with a duration of 50 standard cycles," Ziegther continued. "Neither humanity nor the Concordat will initiate hostile action against the other during this period 50 years, Yuki translated quietly. "Third, we establish formal diplomatic relations, including cultural exchange programs and trade agreements," Ziegther said, then paused. "The Council believes it is important that we understand each other better after you tried to conquer us," Webb asked, his tone carefully neutral, "especially after we tried to conquer you." Ziegther said bluntly, "General Webb, if I may speak candidly." "Please, the Concordat has existed for 3,000 of your years," Ziegther explained. "In that time, we have encountered 47 emerging species that reach spaceflight capability. Of those 47, 39 accepted integration peacefully. 7 refused and were neutralized. And 1 fought us to a standstill. Let me guess which one we are," Maria said dryly. "You're not just the one that fought us," Ziegther said, his scales shifting to colors that suggested something between respect and fear. "You're the one that made us question whether our entire approach to emerging species has been fundamentally flawed. Explain." Maria requested. Ziegther stood and began pacing, a very human gesture that made Yuki wonder if he'd been studying their body language. "We believe that superior technology and overwhelming force would ensure compliance," he said. "We thought that rational beings would surrender rather than accept catastrophic casualties. But we're not rational by your standards." Yuki said no. "You're not," Ziegther agreed. "You're a species that has survived by refusing to accept defeat even when defeat is the logical outcome. You fight with creativity and determination that we've never encountered before." He turned to face them directly. "More importantly, you made us realize that forcing species to submit creates resentment rather than genuine cooperation," Ziegther continued. "Even if we had destroyed your military completely, we would have faced centuries of resistance, sabotage, and rebellion. You're saying you learned that conquest isn't worth the cost?" Webb summarized. "Yes," Ziegther said simply. "Humanity taught us that lesson. At a price we're still counting." Maria glanced at her team, seeing the same cautious optimism she felt. "What are the real terms?" she asked. "Beyond the formal language of treaties, the real terms are simple," Ziegther said. "The Concordat leaves humanity alone to develop as you choose in exchange. You agree not to spread your particular brand of warfare across the galaxy? Our particular brand?" Webb asked. "Kamikaze drones, suicide runs, scorched earth tactics, psychological warfare, and the general philosophy that acceptable casualties is whatever number it takes to win," Ziegther listed. "Most species in the galaxy fight to minimize losses. You fight to maximize enemy losses, regardless of your own casualties. You want us to promise not to export human military doctrine? Maria said. Understanding the subtext, we want you to promise that if other species encounter you, they don't learn to fight the way you fight, Ziegther clarified. Because if human warfare spreads across the galaxy, the next 1,000 years will make the last 3,000 look peaceful by comparison. Webb actually smiled at that. You're afraid of us, he said. Not as an accusation, but as a simple observation, terrified. Ziegther admitted freely, General, in 6 hours of combat. You destroyed more Concordat ships than we've lost in the past century of conflicts combined. Your people fought with a ferocity that our military analysts are still trying to understand. He pulled up casualty reports. Humanity took 93% casualties in that battle, and you were preparing to keep fighting. Ziegther said, Our analysts calculated that if we had continued the assault, we would have eventually won. But it would have cost us 80% of the fleet and decades of recovery time, and then you'd have to deal with our colonies. Maria added, Yes. Every single human settlement made it clear they would fight independently even if Earth fell, Ziegther said. We would have been fighting a guerrilla war across dozens of star systems for generations. Yuki leaned forward, her academic curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. What did your military historians conclude about why we fight this way? She asked. They concluded that humanity evolved on a death world, Ziegther said. Your planet has extinctional-level events every few thousand years. Predators that hunted your ancestors, diseases that killed millions, and environmental conditions that would have destroyed most species. And Yuki prompted, and you survived all of it by developing a psychology that simply doesn't accept extinction as an outcome, Ziegther said. Most species, when faced with overwhelming threat, either adapt or die. Humans apparently just get angry and fight harder. That's actually a pretty accurate summary of human history. Yuki agreed. The negotiations continued for another 3 hours, working through the details of trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense provisions. The final treaty included several points that would have been unthinkable before the conflict. Humanity would be granted full membership in the Galactic Concordat as an equal partner rather than a subordinate species. Human military vessels would be allowed to operate freely in Concordat space, and most surprisingly, the Concordat requested permission to study human military history and tactics. Why would you want to study how we fight? Maria asked. Because ignorance of human capabilities is what led to this conflict, Ziegther explained. The Council has mandated that all Concordat military officers must complete a course on human warfare. Not to copy your tactics, but to ensure we never again make the mistake of underestimating you. Webb looked at Admiral Chenwei, both of them clearly thinking the same thing. You're going to teach other species to be afraid of us. Webb said we're going to teach them to respect you, Ziegther corrected. There's a difference. When the treaty was finally signed, both sides stood for a moment of silence, honoring those who had died in the conflict. Maria looked at the document and felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that the war was over, pride in what humanity had achieved, and sorrow for the price they'd paid. One more thing, Ziegther said as they prepared to leave. The Council asked me to deliver a message to humanity. What message? Maria asked. Never give humans a deadline, Ziegther said with what might have been a smile if his species had lips. They'll use it to prepare 6 months later. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood before the first session of the Galactic Council that included a human representative. Chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them watching the humans with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. The human delegation requests permission to address the Council. Maria said. Formally permission granted, replied the Council chair. A crystalline being whose species had been part of the Concordat for over 1,000 years. Maria stepped forward. The Galactic Concordat and humanity have come through a difficult period, she began. We fought a war that neither side wanted and that both sides nearly lost. Murmurs of agreement from the Concordat representatives. But we learned something valuable from that conflict. Maria continued. We learned that cooperation is more powerful than conquest, that respect is more lasting than fear, and that even species as different as ours can find common ground. She paused, letting her next words carry full weight. Humanity joins the Galactic Concordat not as a conquered people, but as equal partners, Maria said. We bring our technology, our creativity, and yes, our particular way of solving problems in the back of the chamber. An aggressive-looking delegation from a species called the Kryn Swarm whispered among themselves. Day 29 began with the Concordat fleet moving into attack formation above Earth. 500 warships arranging themselves in patterns designed for systematic planetary bombardment, their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto population centers and military installations in the Geneva Command Center. General Marcus Webb stood before the tactical display with his remaining senior officers, all of them showing the wear of 4 weeks of constant combat. But none of them showing any sign of surrender. Final count? Webb asked quietly. 217 military vessels operational, Admiral Chen Wei reported. Another 4,000 civilian ships that had been retrofitted with whatever weapons we could mount on them, plus approximately 15,000 kamikaze drones in reserve against 500 Concordat warships that each outclass our best ships by a significant margin, Webb said. Not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact. Yes, sir. Any word from the colonies? Every single colony has sent ships, Chen Wei said, his voice thick with emotion. Venus, Mars, the Belt, Europa, Titan, even the small mining outposts, they've all sent everything they have? Webb nodded. Understanding what that meant, this wasn't just Earth's fight anymore. It was humanity's fight. Every person in every settlement across the solar system had decided they would rather die fighting than live under Concordat. Control Luna Base reports they're ready. With the Sundiver missiles, another officer added, referring to the experimental weapons that had been developed in absolute secrecy. Good. Webb said, what about the civilian population? Earth's major cities have been evacuated to underground shelters, came the response. We estimate 92% of the population is in protected areas. That's the best we can do, Webb acknowledged, knowing that even the deepest shelters wouldn't save everyone if the Concordat carried out their threat of complete bombardment aboard the Shadow of Earth. Captain Jessica Ramirez briefed her crew for what would likely be their final mission. Our job is to take out as many of their command ships as possible, she explained, the exhaustion evident in her voice. We go in fast. We hit hard. And we don't expect to come back? Lieutenant Park raised his hand, yes. Ramirez acknowledged permission to speak freely, Captain. Granted, this is crazy, Park said, but he was smiling. We're about to attack a fleet that outnumbers us massively, with ships that are technologically superior in every way, and our battle plan is basically charge and hope for the best. That's accurate. Ramirez agreed. I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly, Park said. Because I'm absolutely on board with this level of crazy. The entire crew laughed. The kind of laughter that comes when people have accepted their fate and decided to face it with humor rather than fear. Any of you want to record final messages for family? Ramirez asked. Knowing what the answer would be, but feeling obligated to offer, every single crew member shook their heads. We already said our goodbyes when we volunteered for this mission, one ensign said. Now let's make sure those goodbyes meant something similar. Scenes played out across the human fleet. Crews preparing for what they all knew was likely a suicide mission, but not one of them suggesting surrender as an alternative in the Concordat flagship. Ambassador Zekther made one final attempt to understand the enemy he was about to destroy. Computer. Analyze human cultural patterns related to warfare and survival, he commanded. The analysis took 3 minutes, which was unusually long for the advanced AI analysis complete, the computer reported. Warning, conclusions fall outside expected parameters for rational species behavior. Explain. Zekther ordered human cultures consistently demonstrate a preference for resistance over survival when faced with domination, the AI said. Historical data shows humans will accept casualty rates exceeding 90% rather than submit to control by others. That's not rational, correct? By Concordat standards, it is completely irrational, the AI agreed, however. This behavior appears to be a fundamental characteristic of human psychology rather than a logical choice. The computer displayed examples. Rebellions throughout human history where the rebels had no realistic chance of victory but fought anyway. Last stands where small forces held positions against overwhelming odds purely to buy time for others. Resistance movements that continued even after their cause appeared lost. They don't know how to quit, Zector said slowly. Finally understanding what Dr. Tanaka had been trying to tell him, that is an accurate summary. The AI confirmed to begin the assault, Zector ordered. Because the Concordat Council demanded it, and because he had run out of alternatives, the Concordat fleet opened fire. What followed was the largest space battle in human history, and the first time the Concordat had faced serious resistance from an emerging species. Human ships poured out of Earth's orbital space like angry hornets from a disturbed nest, not in neat military formations but in chaotic swarms that made targeting difficult. The kamikaze drones came first. 15,000 automated death machines that the Concordat wasted ammunition destroying while the real ships maneuvered into position. Captain Ramirez led her stealth wing directly at the Concordat flagship, using the sensor confusion from the drone assault to get closer than any military planner would have thought possible. All ships target the command vessel, she broadcast on the encrypted channel. Make this count. The Shadow of Earth and her sister ships opened fire simultaneously at point-blank range, their weapons tearing into the Concordat flagship's shields. Alarms screamed aboard the alien vessel as systems overloaded there inside our defensive perimeter. Someone shouted. Zector watched in horror as human ships that should have been destroyed already kept coming, kept firing, kept fighting, even as they took catastrophic damage. One human destroyer, its hull breached and atmosphere venting, deliberately rammed a Concordat cruiser rather than dying uselessly. They're insane. A Concordat officer screamed. No, Zector said quietly. They're human. The civilian ships came next. 4,000 vessels that had been cargo haulers, passenger liners, and mining barges just weeks ago. Now they flew at the Concordat fleet with weapons that were barely functional and tactics that were completely reckless. A Concordat weapons officer targeted what appeared to be a cruise ship and hesitated. It's broadcasting a distress signal, he reported, claiming they have civilians aboard. It's a trick, the tactical commander said. Destroy it. The cruise ship exploded, but not from Concordat weapons. Instead, it detonated its own reactors at the moment it passed between two Concordat warships, the explosion taking both alien vessels with it. That ship was loaded with explosives, someone realized. They were never planning to survive across the battle space. Similar events played out, human ships using tactics that no rational species would employ, accepting catastrophic losses to achieve tactical objectives, fighting with a creativity born from 5,000 years of warfare on Earth's lunar surface. The Sundiver missiles launched, these were humanity's secret weapon. Missiles that had been sent on trajectories that took them dangerously close to the sun, using its gravity to build up incredible velocity before swinging back toward Earth. They arrived in the battle space, traveling at speeds that made them nearly impossible to intercept, each one carrying enough kinetic energy to tear through shields that would have stopped conventional weapons. 3 Concordat carriers exploded as the Sundiver missiles punched through them like bullets. Through paper? Where did those come from? Zector demanded. We're tracking the trajectory backward, a technician reported. They apparently launched these weeks ago and used solar gravity to accelerate them. They planned this, Zector said in disbelief. They knew exactly when and where we would attack and prepared weapons specifically for this moment. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human casualties were catastrophic. Of the 200 military vessels, less than 40 survived. The civilian ships fared even worse, with 90% losses, but the Concordat fleet was bleeding to 27 warships destroyed outright. Another 43 damaged badly enough to be combatant effective. And the flagship itself had taken so much damage that it was barely operational. General Webb watched the tactical display from a backup command center. The primary one, having been destroyed in the opening salvos, they're retreating? Admiral Chen Wei said in disbelief. What? Webb looked up sharply on the display. The Concordat fleet was indeed pulling back, consolidating their forces and moving to a higher orbit. Hail them. Webb order Regictor appeared on the screen, his scales showing colors that the translation software struggled to identify, but that looked distinctly unhealthy. General Webb, the ambassador said tiredly. I am requesting a ceasefire to recover wounded and retrieve survivors. You're retreating. Webb asked bluntly. We are consolidating our position, Zector said. Which was diplomat speak for yes, you still outnumber us, Webb pointed out. You could keep fighting and probably win. At what cost? Zector asked quietly. We've lost 60 ships in 6 hours fighting an enemy we were told would surrender after the first bombardment. Your forces have taken 90% casualties, and you're still fighting, he paused. Day 16 of the ultimatum began with the Concordat making what they considered a measured demonstration of their superior firepower. They selected an unmanned human, a research station at the edge of the Sol system, and reduced it to atoms in approximately 4 seconds. The message was clear. Surrender, or this happens to inhabited stations, General Marcus. Webb watched the destruction from the command center in Geneva, his expression unchanged. As if he'd been expecting exactly this response. That was Research Station Kepler 7, reported Admiral Chen Wei. Total loss, no casualties because we evacuated it 3 days ago. Did we get the readings we needed? Webb asked. Every sensor we planted in that sector recorded the entire attack sequence, a technician confirmed. We now have detailed data on their primary weapon systems, firing patterns, and energy signatures. Webb smiled coldly. So they just gave us intelligence data and thought they were demonstrating superiority, said. Send the analysis to all fleet commanders immediately, General. We're receiving a communication from the Concordat flagship. Communications Officer Chen announced. Ambassador Zector appeared on the main display, his 3 eyes showing what the translation software identified as satisfaction. That was a demonstration of what will happen if you do not comply with our ultimatum, Alien said formally. You have 14 rotations remaining to accept our generous terms. Generous? Webb stepped forward, his voice conversational, but carrying an edge that made even his own staff nervous. You destroy our property and call it generous? We could have destroyed an inhabited station, Zector pointed out. We chose to minimize casualties. This is the Concordat way. Well, Ambassador, let me tell you about the human way, Webb said, his smile never reaching his eyes. We don't respond well to threats. We don't surrender to bullies. And we definitely don't appreciate anyone destroying our stuff. You are in no position to. Zector began. You just fired the first shot, Webb interrupted. Which means we're now officially at war. And I want to thank you for that. Because now I don't have to worry about diplomatic niceties anymore. He nodded to Communications Officer Chen, who cut the transmission before Zector could respond. All units. This is General Webb. He broadcast on every military channel. The Concordat has opened hostilities. Protocol Prometheus is now fully active. All restrictions are lifted. Make them regret it across human space. Ships that had been disguised as civilian vessels dropped their camouflage, literally shedding fake hull plating to reveal weapons platforms and military-grade engines underneath in the Kuiper Belt. Asteroid mining stations that had been operating for decades suddenly sprouted weapons arrays that had been hidden in their rock faces, powered by reactors that had always been there but never activated until this moment. Captain Jessica Ramirez received her orders aboard the Shadow of Earth. Strike Concordat supply lines and make them feel vulnerable. How many ships in our strike group? She asked Lieutenant Park. 15 stealth ships. 40 retrofitted civilian vessels configured for hit-and-run attacks. And 200 automated kamikaze drones. Park read from the tactical display. 200 kamikaze drones. Ramirez repeated. Who authorized that? High Command. Apparently someone decided that if we're going to fight dirty, we might as well fight really dirty, Park said with a grim smile. The kamikaze drones were one of humanity's more disturbing innovations. Automated ships with basic AI, loaded with explosives, designed for exactly one mission before self-destructing. They cost almost nothing to build but were psychologically devastating, because they meant humans were willing to waste resources just to cause damage. The Concordat is going to hate these. Ramirez predicted that's the point. Park agreed. The Shadow of Earth and her strike group slipped away from their hidden staging area near Neptune, moving silently through space using stealth technology that humanity had developed specifically because they'd always suspected first contact might go badly 3 days later. They found their target, a Concordat supply convoy moving between their fleet and a staging area near Jupiter. 6 large cargo ships escorted by 2 military vessels. They're not even running active sensors. Park observed with disbelief. They think they're completely safe in our own solar system. They're about to learn different, Ramirez said. Deploy the kamikaze drone's first conventional attack pattern. Make them think that's our main assault. The drones launched. 200 automated death machines accelerating toward the Concordat convoy at speeds that would have killed any living pilot. Alien escorts detected them immediately and opened fire. Their defensive systems efficiently destroying drone after drone. They're good, Park admitted. Watching the tactical display, now launch the real attack, Ramirez ordered. The Shadow of Earth and the other stealth ships had been creeping closer during the drone assault, and now they opened fire at point-blank range, their weapons targeting the supply ships rather than the escorts. 3 of the cargo vessels exploded before the Concordat forces even realized they were under attack from a second direction. The automated civilian vessels, retrofitted with weapons they were never designed to carry, came in from yet another angle. Flying patterns that no military academy would teach because they were too reckless and sacrificed defensive capability for pure aggression. They're panicking, Park reported. Watching the Concordat escorts trying to respond to attacks from 3 different directions simultaneously. Their command structure is too rigid. They're waiting for orders instead of adapting. Human commanders would have split their forces and responded immediately, Ramirez noted. Filed that observation for the intelligence division. The battle lasted 7 minutes, which was 6 minutes longer than Ramirez had expected when it ended. All 6 Concordat supply ships were destroyed. 1 escort was crippled. And the human forces had lost 37 kamikaze drones and 5 civilian vessels. Retreat. Scatter pattern Delta, Ramirez ordered. Don't let them track us back to base. The strike group vanished into the darkness of space, leaving the surviving Concordat escort to report what had happened aboard the Concordat flagship. Ambassador Ziegther listened to the report with growing concern. They attacked a supply convoy. He repeated, inside their own star system. Yes, Ambassador, the military commander confirmed. They used automated weapons, stealth ships, and vessels that appeared to be civilian craft modified for combat civilian craft. Ziegther's scales rippled with confusion. Why would they sacrifice civilian resources? Unknown, but the pattern suggests they're willing to convert any available vessel into a weapon platform. The commander pulled up tactical analyses. More concerning is their use of automated attack drones. They're treating ships as disposable resources. Ziegther thought back to Dr. Tanaka's lecture about human warfare and felt his respiratory system constrict again. What were our losses? He asked. 6 supply vessels, 1 escort damaged. Approximately 40% of the convoy's total value, the commander reported. Human losses appear to be limited to automated drones and a few modified civilian ships. They traded disposable resources for our actual military assets, Ziegther said slowly. That's not how civilized warfare works. No, it's not, the commander agreed. But it appears to be how human warfare works over the next week. The pattern repeated across human space. Hit-and-run attacks on Concordat supply lines, communication relays, and isolated patrol vessels. Never any major battles, never any direct confrontation with the main fleet. Just constant harassment that forced the Concordat to spread their forces thinner and thinner to protect their logistics. On day 23, a Concordat patrol intercepted what they thought was a human communications broadcast between military units. Strike Team 7. This is command, the voice said in clear English. Proceed to rally Point Baker-Niner and await further orders. The Concordat forces triangulated the signal and moved to intercept, finding nothing except an automated transmitter and a very large mind. The explosion took out 3 ships. They're using fake communications to lure us into traps. The Concordat military commander reported to Ziegther, his tone suggesting he was starting to understand what they were really fighting. How is that honorable? Ziegther demanded. It's not, the commander said bluntly. It's effective on day 20. A Concordat landing force attempted to occupy a small human colony on one of Jupiter's moons, expecting to find frightened civilians ready to surrender instead. They found the civilians had evacuated and left behind buildings rigged with explosives. traps at every entrance, and automated defense systems that had been programmed with absolutely no concern for collateral damage. The Concordat forces captured the colony. But it cost them 200 soldiers, and when they'd secured the area, they found nothing of value because the humans had stripped everything useful before leaving. They poisoned their own wells, Concordat officer reported. Using an ancient phrase that roughly translated the human concept of scorched earth tactics, they'd rather destroy their own resources than let us have them. The reports kept coming. Human forces fighting from prepared positions and then retreating before they could be surrounded. Civilians building improvised weapons. Resistance fighters operating behind Concordat lines using guerrilla tactics that made it impossible to tell who was a combatant and who wasn't. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in the broadcasting chamber of the International Communications Hub, her presentation loaded and ready. Her hands steady, despite knowing that 500 alien warships were watching from orbit. "This is a terrible idea," muttered her assistant, Raj Patel, from the control booth. "It's a brilliant idea," Yuki corrected him. "They think they know us because they've scanned our ships and counted our weapons. But they haven't studied what makes us who we are." The Concordat had accepted her request for a cultural exchange broadcast. With what their translators indicated was amused condescension, they probably expected her to beg for mercy or try to negotiate. Which was exactly why this would work. The green light activated, and Yuki smiled at the camera with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire career studying alien ecology. "Greetings, Ambassador Zeke Thor, and honored members of the Galactic Concordat," she began pleasantly. "I am Dr. Yuki Tanaka, xenobiologist and cultural historian, and I've been granted permission to help you understand humanity before the deadline expires on the Concordat flagship." Zeke Thor watched with his primary eye, while the others monitored tactical displays. "Expecting some kind of primitive propaganda, you've observed our technology and military capabilities," Yuki continued. "But I'd like to share something you may not have included in your assessment." Human history. The screen behind her lit up with images from Earth's past. Starting with ancient cave paintings, humans have existed as a distinct species for approximately 300,000 of your standard cycles. She said for most of that time, we were prey animals on a planet that was actively trying to kill us. Images flashed across the screen: saber-toothed predators, volcanic eruptions, ice sheets covering continents. We survived by being adaptable, innovative, and absolutely refusing to accept extinction. Yuki's voice took on a lecturer's tone. When the climate changed and our food sources disappeared, we didn't die out. We learned to hunt different prey and gather different plants. Zeke Thor felt his attention being drawn to the presentation despite himself. There was something in the human's tone that suggested this wasn't going where he expected. "Then we developed civilization," Yuki said as images of ancient cities appeared, "and immediately began fighting each other with a creativity and determination that would define our entire history." The screen showed ancient battles. Armies clashing with bronze weapons. "The Galactic Concordat has fought wars," Yuki acknowledged. "But I want you to understand human warfare. Because it's different from what you're familiar with." New images appeared: World War I trenches. Soldiers standing in mud and blood, fighting for years over strips of land measured in meters. "This is what we call the First World War," Yuki explained. "Millions of humans died fighting each other using weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. We invented poison gas, machine guns, and artillery that could level entire cities." Zeke Thor's scales shifted colors involuntarily. These primitives had done this to themselves. "We fought that war for 4 years," Yuki said, "and learned absolutely nothing from it, because 20 years later, we did it again." But bigger World War II footage played. Atomic bomb explosions. Entire cities reduced to ash in seconds. The Second World War introduced nuclear weapons. Yuki's voice was calm, almost casual. "We created bombs that could destroy entire population centers in an instant. And we used them." The Concordat representatives were watching with growing horror after that war ended. "Two of our major power blocks entered what we called the Cold War," Yuki continued. "They built enough nuclear weapons to destroy our entire planet several times over. Pointed them at each other and lived that way for 40 years. Why didn't you destroy yourselves?" Zector found himself asking before he could stop the question. Yuki smiled as if she'd been waiting for that exact question because we developed a doctrine called mutually assured destruction, she explained. The concept was simple. If you destroy us, we'll make absolutely certain we destroy you too. Even if we're already dying, she'll let that sink in for a moment. The important thing to understand is that this wasn't a bluff, Yuki said seriously. Humans mean it when we say we'll take you down with us. It's not a negotiating tactic. It's a cultural characteristic. The screen changed to show the Mars Rebellion of 2156. Colonial forces fighting against Earth's military with improvised weapons and desperate tactics. When our own colonies rebelled against Earth's control, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no realistic chance of military victory, Yuki said. They fought anyway for 7 years, until Earth agreed to grant them independence. The pattern you should notice, she continued, is that humans don't calculate odds the way you do. We don't surrender just because the math says we should lose. Zeke, though, was beginning to feel something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Let me show you one specific example, Yuki said. Pulling up ancient Earth history, the screen showed 300 Spartan warriors standing in a mountain pass, facing an army of hundreds of thousands. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, Yuki explained. 300 soldiers held a strategic position against a force that outnumbered them. By more than 1,000 to 1 they lost, Zeke Thor pointed out. Yes, they all died, Yuki agreed cheerfully. But they held that position for 3 days and killed thousands of enemy soldiers. And more importantly, they bought time for their city-states to prepare a defense. She advanced to the next slide when the Persian emperor demanded they surrender their weapons. The Spartan king replied with 2 words, Molen Labe, which means, Zeke Thor asked, though he suspected he already knew. Come and take them, Yuki translated. It's become a phrase we use when we're outnumbered and outgunned. But refused to surrender anyway. The presentation shifted to more recent history. Guerrilla fighters in jungles and mountains. Resistance movements operating behind enemy lines. Civilians building improvised weapons in their basements. Human military doctrine includes something we call asymmetric warfare, Yuki said. When we can't match an enemy in conventional combat, we change the rules. Examples flashed across the screen. Booby traps. Sabotage. Hit-and-run attacks. Psychological warfare. We fight dirty, Yuki said bluntly. We lie. We cheat. We use every underhanded tactic we can imagine. And we keep fighting long after conventional military theory says we should have surrendered aboard the Concordat flagship. The military commanders were exchanging concerned glances. I'm sharing this history with you, Yuki said, her tone shifting to something more serious. Because I want you to understand what you're actually challenging when you give us an ultimatum. The screen behind her showed a simple equation. Humanity plus deadline equals preparation time. You've given us 30 days. Yuki said, You think that's generous? You think it's plenty of time for us to realize we're beaten and accept your terms? She leaned forward slightly. What you've actually done is give us 30 days to prepare. Her voice was matter-of-fact. 30 days to activate contingency plans we've been developing since we first reached the stars. 30 days to retrofit civilian vessels into weapons platforms. 30 days to remind ourselves of every dirty trick we've learned in 5,000 years of warfare. Zeke Thor felt his respiratory system constrict. The Galactic Concordat has superior technology. Yuki acknowledged. You have more ships, better weapons. And you've never lost a war against an emerging species, she smiled. But you've never fought humans before, she said quietly. You've never fought a species that invented the concept of kamikaze attacks, or scorched earth tactics, or mutually assured destruction. The screen showed a simple text slide. Humanity's response to existential threats. Hold my beer. I don't understand that reference. Zeke Thor admitted it's an idiom, Yuki explained. It means, watch this. I'm about to do something incredibly dangerous and probably stupid, but I'm going to do it anyway. She stood up. Preparing to end the broadcast. Ambassador Zeke Thor, honored Concordat representatives. I've shown you our history because I want you to make an informed decision, Yuki said. You can still withdraw your ultimatum and open genuine diplomatic relations. Silence from the alien fleet. But if you proceed with your current course, Yuki continued, You should know exactly what you're getting into. You're not fighting a military force that will surrender when it takes too many casualties. You're fighting an entire species that has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars. In our own worst impulses, she gathered her notes. We're the species that looked at a planet trying to kill us and decided to stay anyway, Yuki said. We're the ones who split the atom and immediately wondered what would happen if we used it as a weapon. We're the civilization that has nearly destroyed itself a dozen times and kept going. The final slide appeared behind her. Images of Earth from space. Beautiful and blue and fragile. You've given us 30 days to choose between submission and extinction, Yuki said quietly. But there's a third option. You haven't considered what option? Zichther asked despite himself. We make you regret ever coming here, Yuki said simply. We make you fight for every meter of space. Every orbital platform, every colony. We make the cost so high that even if you win, you lose, she smiled one more time. Thank you for listening to my presentation on human history, she said. I hope it was educational. The broadcast ended. SP. The massive alien warships appeared in Earth's orbit without warning on a Tuesday morning in the year 2347, blocking out portions of the sky like artificial eclipses that sent humanity's defense networks into immediate chaos. 500 vessels hung in perfect formation above the blue planet, each one larger than anything humans had ever constructed in space, their hulls gleaming with technologies that made Earth's most advanced destroyers look like children's toys inside. The United Nations Emergency Command Center in Geneva, Secretary General Maria Okonkwo stood before the holographic display with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the alien fleet with an expression that revealed nothing of the racing thoughts behind her dark eyes. They're hailing us, said Communications Officer Chen. His voice, admirably steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead, put them through. Maria replied. The hologram shifted to show a being that looked vaguely reptilian, with copper-scaled skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangular pattern on an elongated skull that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. I am Ambassador Zichther of the Vrellan Empire, speaking for the Galactic Concordat. The alien's voice came through the translators with an odd musical quality that somehow made the words more threatening rather than less. We have observed your species for 12 of your solar cycles and have reached a unanimous decision. Maria waited, knowing that showing eagerness or fear would set the wrong tone for everything that followed. Humanity has expanded too rapidly and without proper authorization, Zichther continued, his middle eye focusing directly on the camera while the other two scanned something off-screen. Your aggressive terraforming and colonial ambitions mark you as dangerously unpredictable. We have broken no laws, Maria said calmly. You are not part of the Concordat. Therefore, you do not know what laws exist. The ambassador's scales rippled with what the xenology team would later identify as contempt. We are offering you an opportunity that few species receive when they reach this stage of development. The hologram shifted to show a document written in symbols that the computers struggled to translate in real time. You will dismantle all colonies beyond your home star system within 30 of your planetary rotations. Extor's tone suggested he was reading from a script he'd delivered many times before. You will submit all military assets to Concordat oversight and accept integration into civilized galactic society under our guidance, and if we refuse, Maria asked, then we will dismantle your colonies ourselves and reduce your industrial capacity to pre-spaceflight levels. The answer came without hesitation or emotion. This is the standard protocol for non-compliant emerging species. In the back of the command center, General Marcus Webb leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his weathered face completely unreadable to anyone who didn't know him as well as Maria did. But she caught the tiny upward quirk at the corner of his mouth that meant he was finding something darkly amusing. We will need time to consider your generous offer, Maria said with perfect diplomatic neutral. Lidicor's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, which the computer tagged as probable confusion. You need time to consider survival? The ambassador tilted his head. Very well. You have 30 rotations as stated. The countdown begins now. The communication cut off abruptly, leaving the command center in shocked silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Before everyone started talking at once, Maria raised one hand, and the room fell quiet immediately. General Webb. Activate Protocol Prometheus. She said quietly. Every person in the room who knew what that meant went very still. And those who didn't know started asking questions that received no answers. Webb pushed off from the wall and walked to the main console, entering a code so classified that it required 3 different biometric scans and a quantum encrypted authorization that took 15 seconds to verify. Are we really doing this? Asked Admiral Chenwei, commander of Earth's orbital defense platforms. They gave us a deadline. Webb said as the protocol activated across every human military installation in the solar system and beyond. That was their first mistake. What's the protocol? Asked a junior officer who'd only been assigned to the command center 3 months ago. Maria turned to face the room, her expression grave but determined. Protocol Prometheus is based on a very simple premise, she explained. Humanity has been preparing for first contact since we left Earth, and we divided our predictions into 2 categories: friendly contact and hostile contact. This is obviously hostile, the junior officer said. Yes. And when our strategic planners gamed out hostile first contact scenarios, they made one critical assumption. Webb took over the explanation. Any species advanced enough to reach us would have superior technology. So we couldn't match them ship for ship or weapon for weapon, so what do? Another voice called out. We cheat, Webb said with a grim smile. We lie, we steal. We use every dirty trick that 5,000 years of human warfare has taught us, and we make them regret ever giving us 30 days to prepare across human space. The protocol's activation sent encrypted signals to colonial governors, military commanders, corporate shipyard directors, and even civilian organizations that had secretly been part of the contingency planning for years on Mars. The massive Valles Marineris shipyards that supposedly built cargo haulers began opening hidden sections where military-grade vessels had been under construction for the past decade in the asteroid belt. Mining operations that had always seemed barely profitable suddenly revealed why they'd really been established. Each major asteroid had been hollowed out and filled with weapons platforms that now began powering up there. Systems. Every retired military officer from the colonial wars received a simple message. Prometheus active. Report for duty. Captain Jessica Ramirez sat in her small apartment on Luna, staring at the message on her datapad, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came with knowing she was about to do exactly what she'd trained for her entire career. She grabbed her go-bag from the closet where it had been packed and ready for 3 years and headed for the door without bothering to lock it behind her, because if this went badly, there wouldn't be an apartment to come back to anyway. The University of Tokyo's Xenobiology department. Dr. Yuki Tanaka dismissed her class early and immediately began compiling every piece of data humanity had collected about the Concordat species. Over the years of quiet observation, the aliens thought humans didn't know about them before today. But Earth's deep space monitoring stations had been tracking Concordat ship movements for almost 2 decades, learning their patterns, studying their technology from a distance, preparing for exactly this moment. They think they know what we are, Yuki muttered to herself as she worked, pulling up historical databases that most people had forgotten existed. They've scanned our technology and counted our ships and think they understand us. She opened a file labeled Human Conflict History, Comprehensive Analysis, and began crafting a presentation that would either save her species or get her labeled as insane back in Geneva. Maria stood at the window of her office, looking up at the night sky, where the alien fleet was visible as a cluster of bright points that didn't move like stars. They've made this offer before. The Concordat has a whole procedure for dealing with upstart species. How many accepted? Maria asked. According to the intelligence files, about 60% surrender immediately, 30% negotiate for better terms and eventually submit, and 10% refuse and get wiped out within a week. They're very confident they have reason to be, Webb admitted. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours in most areas. They outnumber us significantly. And they've never lost a war against an emerging species? Never? Maria turned to face him. Never, Webb confirmed, then smiled that dangerous smile again. which means they've never fought anyone crazy enough to actually challenge them. Are we crazy, Marcus? Absolutely, he said without hesitation. We're a species that invented weapons capable of destroying our own planet and then built enough of them to do it several times over. We've fought wars that killed millions over ideologies and resources and pride. We've survived ice ages and plagues and our own stupidity, and we're still here. The Concordat doesn't understand that. No, they don't, Webb agreed. They see our technology level and our population numbers and think they know what we're capable of. But they haven't studied what makes us human general. We're the species that looked at the idea of extinction and said, "Not today," Webb said quietly. We're the ones who fell down and got back up so many times that we forgot falling down was supposed to be the end. Maria nodded slowly and returned to her desk. Pulling up the communication channel to address all of humanity, "This is Secretary General Okonkwo," she began, her voice steady and clear. "By now you all know about the fleet in orbit and the demands that have been made of us across Earth and every human colony. People stopped what they were doing to listen. We have 30 days to decide our future," Maria continued. "The Galactic Concordat expects us to surrender, to dismantle everything we've built among the stars, to accept their oversight and control." She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "I want every human being to understand what I'm about to say next.